In the middle of the confusion, something even more unexpected happened. In a strong underground command center in Tehran, a secure satellite phone was turned on, not to call Moscow, not to call Beijing, but to connect to Ouagadougou. The top leader of Iran asked to speak with Ibrahim Traoré. The world was still struggling to process what had happened. Within the first hour, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu appeared on national television and said, "Iran's nuclear goals will not go without limits. We have taken action." The United States stayed silent, but its warships in the Persian Gulf moved within striking distance. Oil prices rose quickly across Iraq and Syria, and Iranian-aligned militias fought back by shelling American bases. It had begun a regional fire. But inside Iran's halls of power, it wasn't just the missile strikes that worried them. A series of cyber attacks had shut down radar, broken communication, and blinded entire sectors of Iran's defense systems. Tehran suspected working together, a wider web of enemies. In that critical moment, with their traditional allies unsure, Iran turned its gaze south, a gamble, a call to a continent often ignored but now holding unexpected power to a man who had stood against the West and survived. The call was traced through a secure military line, bouncing off 3 coded satellites before reaching West Africa. In the presidential building in Ouagadougou, Ibrahim Traoré was in a high-level meeting with his generals. Reports were already coming in, strange drone activity near the northern borders, a sudden surge of online false news targeting his government. Then came the knock. A senior helper entered the room holding a secure red phone. No words were needed, the weight on the helper's face said it all. Traoré took the phone without pause. The room went still. On the other side, a voice, calm, deep, careful. "President Traoré," said the top leader, "Iran stands on the edge. They want us to fall because if we do, Africa is next." A long silence followed, not from fear, but from thinking. Every word that would follow had results. There was a reason Iran didn't call China or Russia, those powers would offer caution, not promise. But in Traoré, they saw something different. Tehran's intelligence services had been tracking a wider pattern. Mossad agents were reportedly operating in the Sahel, masked as humanitarian workers. French watching drones had been detected over Niger, even after Paris was kicked out and Burkina Faso had refused to be part of the Western security system. That freedom made Traoré dangerous and worth something. Iran viewed the conflict not just as a battle for staying alive, but as a test of global partnerships. If Africa stayed neutral, Israel and its Western allies would control the story. But if even one African leader stood up, especially one with growing regional power, it would send a message. Iran believed the future of this war would not be decided in Tel Aviv or Washington, it might begin in Ouagadougou. The voice on the line did not beg, nor did it trick. It was the voice of a leader under attack, speaking to another who had survived attack after attack. President Kam said, "This is not a request for weapons, it's a request for support. They want to cut us off, but if Africa stands beside us, we are not cut off. We are woken up." Traoré stood silently, eyes fixed forward. Then slowly he responded, "You speak of shared struggle, but where was Iran when the Sahel bled under foreign rule knives?" The line was silent. Still, Traoré continued, "Today is not about yesterday, it is about power. And today you call because you know Africa's voice can no longer be ignored." He didn't agree, he didn't refuse, he changed the conversation. "If we are to stand with you, it must be public, no secret deals. The world must see Iran recognize Africa as an equal." The line stayed quiet, but Kam replied with one sentence, "Then let the world see." What followed was not broadcasted, but intelligence sources confirmed its size. Within the hour, Iranian officials sent coded files directly to Burkina Faso's defense ministry. The contents were shocking. A French-operated drone base, previously denied by Paris, had been discovered inside Niger. Israeli cyber signs were found in bad software used against West African government servers. There were even recordings of private NATO conversations mentioning holding back strategies for Sahelian states. Traoré's security chiefs were in shock. The war wasn't just in the Middle East, it had already crossed into Africa. Silently, his decision was fast. All Western military flights over Burkina Faso were immediately banned. Emergency messages were sent to Mali and Niger. A meeting was called. The plan, regional staying alive. But one idea had already been born. A new partnership, not of the East, not of the West, but of those left out of both. The reaction from African nations was mixed. Mali, already joined with Burkina Faso, offered support. Guinea followed suit. But others waited, fearing economic fighting back or angry response. Western media went crazy, headlines screamed, Burkina Faso joins with Iran. Experts debated whether this was a statement of war or a meaning-something action. The U.S. State Department issued a vague warning about regional making unstable. At the United Nations, African government speakers were trapped with questions. But on the streets of Ouagadougou, Bamako, and Conakry, something else was happening. Crowds began chanting Traoré's name. Posters showed his face next to phrases like, "We will not kneel, and Africa will decide." The West had long thought too little of the meaning-something power of standing alone, now it feared the strength of standing together. Inside his building, Traoré called another closed meeting, but this time it wasn't just generals and ministers, religious leaders, student speakers, and traditional leaders were present. Chiefs were invited. He wanted unity, not just orders. "We have been offered a voice in a war that is not ours," he said, "but make no mistake, if we stay silent, they will come for us next, not with bombs but with blocking, lies, and fake leaders." One elder stood and replied, "Then speak, son, and let the world hear the voice they tried to silence." That night, Traoré released a TV address, not just to his people but to the world. Burkina Faso does not choose war, but we choose justice, and when the hurt people call, we answer, not as tools but as equals. Within hours, Iran's national TV station aired the clip across the Middle East. The image of an African president standing firm became a spread-quickly symbol. Back in Israel, Netanyahu responded quickly in a press speech. He ignored Traoré's remarks as dangerous not knowing, warning that those who side with our enemies will face results. But the message didn't have the weight it once did. The world was shifting. Traoré didn't just support Iran, he forced Iran to respect Africa in return. In doing so, he carved a third path, a rejection of forced loyalties and written ahead talking between countries. And while the missiles still flew over Tehran and the drones still circled over the Red Sea, one quiet signal had been sent: the balance of power no longer belonged to old big powers alone, it now included voices long ignored and newly woken up. What began as a military strike had changed into a global fight of stories. Was this about nuclear weapons or about self-rule? Was Iran the bad guy or the last fighting back state against Western order? And where did Africa stand? For decades, the continent had been asked for help only for resources or stand-in interests, but today, in the middle of global war, it had become a talking between countries turning point. China and Russia stayed careful. They didn't openly support Traoré's move but praised his free stand. Western think tanks rushed to issue reports warning of Africa's dangerous joining, but they missed the real story. Africa wasn't joining with Iran, it was joining with itself, and Traoré was its voice. By the following week, Iran's fighting back had begun, limited but fierce. U.S. bases in Syria were hit, Israeli government buildings in multiple countries went into lockdown, and a cyber attack stopped port operations in Haifa. But the war's most unexpected front was now talking between countries. In the African Union, speakers began quietly discussing the possibility of a not-taking-sides balance bloc. Old partnerships were questioned. Presidents who had stayed neutral felt growing pressure from their own people to speak. In Dar, students marched holding signs saying, "Burkina stood up, what about us?" In Johannesburg, debates on whether Africa should continue voting with the West at the UN grew louder. A political earthquake had been started, not by force but by a phone call. Weeks later, with no official agreement and no exchange of weapons, the world had already changed. Iran stood bruised but not broken. Israel had proven its reach but not its stopping power. The US waited, unwilling to commit full-scale joining in. Africa, long spoken over, was finally speaking for itself. Ibrahim Traoré had not launched a missile, but he had sent a message, one that hit main cities more deeply than any weapon could. Leadership is not about waiting for instructions, it's about recognizing moments when silence is turning against and when one voice, backed by truth and timing, can shift the path of history. And so the world watched as government buildings thought again, as experts rewrote predictions, and as citizens in forgotten corners found something they hadn't had in decades, a reason to believe, not in Iran, not in Israel, not even in war, but in the idea that power is not given, it is stated. And once stated, it must be protected with wisdom, courage, and timing. In a world torn between two sides, someone answered from the center. When missiles fell over the Middle East, a phone rang in West Africa, and when it was answered, everything changed.